Braze alloy between two metal parts should be like two microscope sides glued together with a drop of water, or two gauge blocks that are held together because the surfaces are so smooth. Beach marks, then here of course you have huge bubbles where there was too much trapped gas. We did this with Robert Bosch. Yeah, this was a carbide failure, and I don't think this is big bubbles. And I think this is more carbide than brazing. That may be the end of it. Braze, we've got a lot of holes in braze alloy under failed tips. This is a good one. Here you can see an awful lot of holes, huge holes. This is once again trapped gas. Failure of a tri-metal shim. Bad surface preparation, they just burn it. A drop saw blade. This is one where the saw ran. This was one of our experimental saws with a brazed ceramic tip. And we used the 49% with manganese. It ran a couple weeks just fine, and then all of a sudden it failed, and we got it back. And we saw this mushroom on the tip, which told us they dropped it. Because otherwise, if it comes out of a saw while the saw is running, all the metal gets pushed back. It doesn't mushroom into the cut. Braze failure with an automatic brazer. This is systematic. Here you can see, this is 100x magnification. There's supposed to be 3 to 5 thousandths of an inch there. There is absolutely no braze alloy in that joint at all. We think that the guy who made these saws was saving about $50,000 to $100,000 a year. And what they had is they had an automatic brazer. Automatic brazers are designed to use ribbon, tri-metal or solid alloy. And what they'll do is index the saw, feed the ribbon in, and then the tip comes down, holds it in place, and then they heat it. Well, ribbon's considerably more expensive than wire. So what you do is you quit using ribbon and go to the cheaper wire, and the saw blade indexes up, the tip comes down, and then you index the wire, which is supposed to wick into the joint. And these hold up real well until somebody actually starts to cut with them. What you can do on braze joint thickness, this was real easy because there was no alloy to get in the way. Yes, sir?
Tom, back up a little bit. You were talking about brazing your ceramic.
Yeah.
We don't get into, we don't have many customers that literally use a ceramic for a cutting tool or braze them. You're usually held in place, work, more mechanical. How can you tell these guys a little bit about what preparation has to be done to the ceramic in order to braze it like a carbide?
Yeah, in order to braze, I'm the only one who can do that. In order to braze, all right, it's a question of brazing carbide. You get told that you need either a surface treatment on the carbide, or the carbide is wettable depending on the amount of cobalt in it. Nobody seems to think that you can braze to tungsten. You can braze to tungsten the same way you braze to titanium or aluminum. The problem is they oxidize very, very rapidly, so it'll form an oxide layer. You need to remove the oxide layer, and then you need to plate it with something. You can plate it with cobalt or nickel. You can use cobalt because that's in the underlying tungsten carbide or titanium carbide. You can plate it with nickel, but you have to be extremely careful that you get the underlying material properly prepared. You can plate a ceramic if it has a refractory metal in it, so you can't braze alumina with the alloys we use, the 56%, the 50%, bag 22, 24, 7, 3. Unless you treat the surface, and in order to treat the surface, you've got to have a metal in it. So we can't use them successfully on an alumina. We can use them successfully on an alumina that's got some titanium carbonitride in it. You can do the same thing with titanium cermets, titanium carbide, titanium nitride. If, once again, you clean the surface extremely well, remove the oxides, and then acid etch it, and then keep it underwater so that it doesn't get a chance to reoxidize, and then you plate it. And once you get a nickel plating on it or a cobalt plating on it, then you can use the standard alloys. this is important because as far as I know, the alloys that we're buying from you are still considerably cheaper and much, much stronger than the active braze alloys. The problem in the industry is that almost nobody wants ceramic tip cutting tools for saw blades because the saw people make their money selling saws or sharpening saws. And why the hell would you want to sell a saw that lasts 5 to 10 times as long when you're not going to get 5 to 10 times the money for it? So I'm the only guy in the world, I think, that actually believes saws ought to run. Well, that's not true. We're developing a nice little market with ceramic tip saws. So what we're using there is more, now to make it more robust, so it's easier to grind, is a combination of tungsten carbide and ceramic.
So you're making your own ceramics for that tip?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're having them made for us, of course,
Yeah,
but making our own saw blades too. So,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Since you're talking plating, do you have like a rule of thumb recommended thickness as far as the plating?
I do. I think as thin as possible. You ought to be able to see just a color. There's a term in plating, and if you see it, things that are hard to plate may have a copper strike on them, and a strike is just what it sounds like. It's a real fast plating because copper will adhere to stuff that nickel won't, and then the nickel will adhere to the copper. I think as thin a joint as possible, and if you're dealing with somebody who's plating, there's a lot of stuff in the literature now about baking after electroless nickel. So if they're plating and having failure on plated parts, once again it's cleaning and surface preparation. Secondly, probably contamination after the surface preparation. Third, if you get an extremely thin plating, it's like a thin coat of paint. If you ever come out, you can stay in my house and you can see the hallway my kids painted one summer. They were supposed to put 2 coats of paint on. Well, it's a lot faster and easier to put 1 coat on and go right behind it with a 2nd coat of paint, which is why I've got a spot in the hallway about that big where the paint peeled off. But the same thing happens with plating. If you get too thick a plating, it's much more likely to peel because the plating, a real thin coating will stick. A real thin coating will stick better to the underlying surface, the stuff you're trying to plate to. If you get a thicker coating, it wants to stick to itself, and if it gets too thick, it will. I've had platings in the lab that got too thick, and they just fall off when we tumble them or wash them in the tumbler. So this is once again an automatic brazer. The guy wasn't real happy with that answer. Do we have time to at least start the brazing video? Show you how to braze saw tips?
Yeah.
Okay. This is our website. Brazing. This is a brazing video I had done. It was suggested by a customer. We start out, this is the West Coast Saws, and Don Wallinger, they make really, really top-end saws. They do a lot of really thin kerf saws, a lot of precision stuff. The second part of the brazing video was done in a sawmill, which is a much more robust application, but Don does a beautiful job on this.